Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Please, I'm welcoming persons here, all of you, and also those joining us on live stream. And my apologies for the warmth in this room. It's terrible, but it's obviously something about the air conditioner isn't quite working as hoped. So, maintenance is notified. Whether they can correct it while we're here, I'm not sure. But please don't let that hamper the enthusiasm in the room. We want to say a special welcome to Paul Redekop, and congratulations on your new book, Truth and Love, The Reality of Near-Death Experiences and the Reunion of Science and Faith. And this is our celebration tonight, so welcome everyone. Paul is a sociologist and longtime professor whose career has focused on understanding human experiences. He has taught in the field of conflict resolution studies here at CMU. And Paul will say more likely about the inspiration for this book, but it began during the final years of his mother's life, when their conversations often turned to faith and loss and what might await us beyond death. Wanting to offer comfort, he shared what he had already known and read about near-death experiences. And after her passing, he set out on a study to understand the reality of these experiences and to determine whether the reassurance he offered her was in fact justified. And his research, as described in the book, left him feeling grateful. The evidence strongly supports the consistency and transformative power of these experiences across cultures, identities, and beliefs. I, for one, am very intrigued to learn more. Paul has invited colleague Jerry Buckland, Dean of Research and Programs, Professor of Economics and of International Development Studies at CMU, to give a fuller introduction shortly. Welcome, Jerry. But first, I'll introduce myself. My name is Arlen. I am the director of Common Word, which is a national Anabaptist bookstore and resource center, jointly operated by Canadian Mennonite University and Mennonite Church Canada, where it's possible to buy, borrow, or access resources online. It's our privilege to be hosting this evening's conversation in Winnipeg, in Treaty 1 territory, on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabeg, Inuiaq, the Anishinaabe, Dakota Oyate, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. We also acknowledge that our water is sourced from Treaty 3 territory and that most of our hydroelectricity comes from Treaty 5. Those of you on live stream may be joining us from other sacred lands, and we make these personalized acknowledgements in respect for the host peoples who have for millennia and continue to love and care for the land. We also acknowledge the many harms, past and present, of settler colonialism, and we recommit ourselves to real change that fosters reconciliation. A couple of quick notes before I call on Jerry to come forward. For those of you participating online, I invite you to send a chat message with your name and general location so we have a sense of who is joining us. This conversation is being recorded and will be kept online at Common Word for future viewers. Toward the end of the program, there will be time for questions and responses. Online viewers can submit their questions or comments via the chat function. I will monitor that and facilitate that conversation. And after the formal part of this event, copies of the book will be available to purchase at Common Word or online at commonword.ca. For those here in person, Paul will be at the table over there to greet you and sign your copy right beside the coffee and cookies. Jerry, I invite you to offer an introduction to Paul and to the book.
Thank you so much, Arlen. Thank you, Paul, for inviting me to share some thoughts. I'm really glad to be here. And so maybe I'll start with a story. And it's a story of a breakfast group that started meeting way back, actually early days of the pandemic. Well, no, actually it was midway through the pandemic. And it happened to be, so Paul and then another friend of ours, Mark Birch, and we decided we'd meet for breakfast every couple of weeks. And it just happened to be at that time my wife was in Mexico. So we were looking for what should we name our group? So we decided, well, let's call ourselves Los Amigos. So we have been meeting virtually every, 2 times a month since then, and we've grown. A couple other members are here. And it's been a really amazing incubator because Mark Birch, who sadly is not here tonight, recently completed a book published by CMU Press. And the idea behind that book, the idea behind the book predates Los Amigos, but his work to refresh that book really started during Los Amigos. And I'm not saying we're responsible for this book, Paul, but we often enjoyed hearing updates from Paul about his book. And we'd have interesting conversations. So it's amazing what a coffee group can do. I really have benefited greatly. And there's probably 1, if not 2 more books coming. I'm kind of looking at Neil and Harold because they still owe the group a book or 2. And the thing that I found, like for me, it was both the kind of the incubation because, we're these people who are interested in topics and we get tired of talking about Donald Trump. So we talk about, some research that we're doing. So there's a real incubation process there, but there's also that mutual support. We bring our problems and questions about what we're doing, and it was really a great opportunity to learn that way. So Paul has contributed to the group by sharing about his book over the years, and we've been really excited to find that he's come to this step. So Paul Redekop has been a friend of mine and a colleague of mine for many years. We go back to early days at Menno Simons College when it was just starting. And as Arlen said, he's a PhD in sociology. He's taught in conflict resolution study. He's done many administrative posts. And he's also a practitioner. He was with Mediation Services. So he's one of those people who's just done a whole variety of things, very inspirational. Paul is also I would say he's a very independent and creative person. And so I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Yuri and who's Yuri's co-author for Getting to Yes? Doesn't matter. The book Getting to Yes was a very important book back in the day in conflict resolution studies. So William Ury was one of the 2 authors of that. Well, William Ury came out with another book later on called Getting to Yes with Yourself. And it was so interesting because Paul had a book on intrapersonal conflict resolution, and I think yours came out first. And as far as I know, there were no other books in the field until Paul's came out. And then it was so interesting, William Ury's comes out. So Paul has always been very creative and very independent. And I think that his work on this topic is more evidence of that creativity and independence. Because as far as I know, beyond what Arlen was sharing about Paul's mom's death and that being an impetus for writing the book, it wasn't something that he studied, but he just took this on. He took this project on and he did the research and he developed the narrative and the thesis and he came up with this really awesome book. Paul is an excellent writer and narrator. I find it very easy to read his work. It's just so interesting to read. I think that the core message in Paul's book comes out very clearly, and it's a message of God's love. It's just very powerful. And, I've heard Paul talk about that for many years, the God's love and the importance of that. So I really value that. And basically, I don't want to cut Paul up, but just his basic argument is that near-death experiences are real, and that maybe they're not well recognized or understood, but they need to be, because there's something that we can learn about near-death experiences. Because Paul argues that through them we can understand what happens beyond life. There's something that goes on for those folks in the near-death experience that we have the benefit to learn from. And his work points out that near-death experiences are mainly positive, that people mainly have positive experiences in them, and they're often life-changing for the person who nearly dies. And those life changes are often in positive ways. Now, there's the negative, and there's the negative ways for sure, but he highlights those positive points. Paul also talks about how from near-death experiences, we can gain insights about heaven. And in other words, life after death. And Paul has a whole interesting part of his book about kind of the theology, like what can we understand about heaven and hell from near-death experiences. It's a very important work that he does there, and I want to talk with him more about it. We had sort of a 5-minute conversation on that particular topic, but I hope we can talk about that more, because it's a really important point. And so yeah, I just wanted to say that I've so appreciated the book and knowing you, and so thank you so much. And are you coming up now? Okay.
Thanks so much, Jerry, and thanks to the amigos, my amigos here, Harold and Neil, and of course Mark. They listened patiently to my rambling on about whatever chapter I was working on at the time, and asked really good questions and helped to keep me going. So it was very important, and I'd also like to welcome my friends and colleagues from River East Church, we've had some wonderful conversations about this topic in the last couple of months, and I really glad to see you here. And this is my wonderful family. I'm so glad to see all of you here. Okay. A little bit about myself, and Arlen and Jerry mentioned about my mother, and that was a very important factor in getting me started on this project. But the other thing was, and I want to say a little bit about myself and you know, how I think, how I see the world. I'm an idea person, and what I mean is, I get an idea in my head, and I get a hold of it, and I gnaw at it like a dog with a bone until I kind of get to the marrow or whatever, just to extend that metaphor. And I did this with a previous book, which on restorative justice, where I got the idea that restorative justice could be used in every place where retributive justice was used, in every circumstance. And I set out to demonstrate the harmful effects of punishment and retribution in every situation, and then presented an all restorative approach. And since I've written it, I think people haven't given up on retribution. It seems to be as popular as ever, but I think there's been some change. I think there's been some grassroots level and more of a concern with conflict resolution and restorative justice, so pleased with that. And in this case, the idea that really got me going was the idea of science in relationship to religion. And I thought I could use science and, you know, my skills as a sociologist who's published numerous research articles and who's actually studied the philosophy of science as well, to look at this, to assess the evidence on near-death experiences from that point of view, and to gauge the reality of it. And of course, as you know, just not to give it away, I'm sort of inclined to believe that in the reality of it. So just to skip to the end. And so, yes, so we're looking at the reality of near-death experience, where people approach death or go into a deep coma and leave their bodies and experience a place filled with light and love, more real than the reality here. So in the process, what I was working toward was this reunion of science and faith, which had been in opposition to each other, basically, I think, since Galileo. And so that was the idea that I was kind of working away at. So I assessed the evidence, which included thousands of interviews carried out with a standardized research schedule, so that which basically tell the same story or a similar story over and over again, all the way through, with corroboration from people's out-of-body experiences, where they left their bodies and carefully observed in great detail the activities that were going on around their bodies, and where there are other people there, like medical staff, who could corroborate that, who could confirm it. And there's also evidence many people meet loved ones, family members, during these experiences. And in many cases, they meet like relatives that they didn't know were relatives, that they hadn't known about before. Or in some cases, they meet people who had died and they didn't know that people had died in the afterlife. So I thought that provided some good corroborating evidence. And not least, the profound transformation that people experience after these near-death experiences, I think, provide a validation for it, which, you know, beyond the immediate experience. So I then proceeded to document the near-death experience, people's experience of a heavenly place, some of whom experienced a hellish place, the return from a near-death experience, which can be difficult, and the transformation that people undergo, and the struggles that they experience afterwards, after their return. But at the heart of the experience is the emergence into the light, filled with unconditional love and a feeling of union with all of humankind, and even with life itself. I want to read just a short excerpt describing that from a woman named Bev Brodsky, who says much the same as many other people say, but is, I think, particularly eloquent in expressing it. Bev was a young woman living in Los Angeles, a Jewish background, but, you know, agnostic, no interest in religion. And she had a very serious motorcycle accident. And she left her body and she rose upward, and I'll just quote her here and that. I then remember traveling a long distance upward toward the light. I believe that I was moving very fast, but this entire realm seemed to be outside of time. Finally, I reached my destination. It was only when I emerged from the other end that I realized that I was no longer accompanied by the being who had brought me there. But I wasn't alone. There before me was the living presence of the light. Within it, I sensed an all-pervading intelligence, wisdom, compassion, love, and truth. There was neither form nor sex to this perfect being. It, which I shall in the future call he, in keeping with our commonly accepted syntax, contained everything, as white light contains all the colors of a rainbow when penetrating a prism. And deep within me came an instant and wondrous recognition. Even I, was facing God. And she goes on to describe her experience further. Now I was filled not just with all knowledge, but also with all love. It was as if the light were poured in and through me. I was God's object of adoration, and from our love, I drew life and joy beyond imagining. My being was transformed. My delusions, sins, and guilt were forgiven and purged without asking, and now I was love, primal being and bliss. And in some sense, I remain there for eternity. Such a union cannot be broken. It always was, is, and shall be. And now you might say, well, was this some kind of hallucination that she had, or wishful thinking, or sort of a dreamlike experience which fades with time? Well, let's see what Bev says about that. She says, although it's been 20 years since my heavenly voyage, I have never forgotten it, nor have I, in the face of ridicule and disbelief, ever doubted its reality. Nothing that intense and life-changing could possibly have been a dream or hallucination. To the contrary, I consider the rest of my life to be a passing fantasy, a brief dream that will end when I again awaken in the permanent presence of that giver of life and bliss. So maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you, Paul. As we said earlier, there's time for conversation, and Daryl's just bringing up the mic that's here. If you have a comment, question, thought, please express that, and we'll continue the conversation that way. I will monitor for those online. I will monitor if there's any conversation there to forward here. Anyone, please.
Okay.
What percentage of people who have sort of clinical deaths come back? It's not everyone.
No, it's actually maybe 20%. Yeah, maybe 15 to 20%.
What was the question? Any idea why? Just a quick follow-up.
Any idea? Really no idea. The only thing I can add to that is that children are much more likely to have the experience. About 3 out of 4 children will have it, which suggests that, maybe their spirits aren't quite as attached to their bodies.
Oh, can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So what's the question? How many people?
Percentage of people who have. People use the mic, please.
Yeah.
For those online as well.
Yeah, I just asked what the percentage of people who have clinical deaths, I guess, or comas, and come back, and you said 20%, and then
Yeah.
I asked any theories
Any
about why
explanation?
it's not 100%, or, yeah.
Yeah, and the only thing I can come up with is that people that the spirit is attached to the body and doesn't give up as quickly, and I say that because children seem to have these experiences much more often than adults, like 3 out of 4 children, and other than that, I can't say this is not like from our point of view from this world, we see through a glass darkly. We never, and so I say, well, is this a certainty that this will happen? I say, well, I think I have a lot of confidence. I would say like maybe 95%. But, there's possibilities, in science, there are always loose ends and so on that, eventually become the basis for the next theory the next explanation. So that's it. That's all I can say.
Okay.
Hi, Paul. My name is Laura, and I have two questions for you. One is methodology. I'm wondering how you found your subjects for your study.
Oh, well, I'm relying on secondary research, other people's research. Also, there is a database. It's called NDERF, if you're interested. And it has, I think, 5,000 cases of people who have been interviewed. And I use that data quite a lot. It's a vast body of data, comparable data. It's a sort of a sociologist's dream to have that data just sitting there accessible. So
Thank you. My second question is, as NDEs are becoming more acceptable or accepted in society, how do you think the ideas, the gifts that these experiences have to offer us will impact our society and our culture?
Oh, that's a big question. Yeah,
You're a sociologist.
I know, I have thought about that, and I think that social changes, new things that are introduced in society, have certain specific effects at first, and then have broader effects later on. I think in this case, if it reduces people's fear of death, that would be a great initial thing. This is what people who have had near-death experiences report. They lose their fear of death. People who take courses or read books on near-death experiences lose their fear of death, and I think that's definitely. Another immediate thing, and I don't know, I may be going off on a tangent here, but there's all this concern about AI. And people are threatened by it because they see, it as taking over human functions. But if they see people, they see human beings as, biological machines, like, as a biological reality. So you're like your brain, and your mind is your brain, and you're competing with this machine, which is, a mechanical versus a biological brain. And I think if we can really focus on ourselves as spiritual beings, we can get a handle on this kind of thing and really see what it can do for us as human beings, as, spiritual beings. So, and also, one more thing on that. I have a vision of unification of world religions. One of my subjects says, there are golden threads in every religion. And I have a vision of those threads being brought together.
Someone else?
That 20% who come back, do they come back randomly, or do you think they come back because they have something left to do?
Oh, okay. And what was the question again?
That 20% who come back, do they come back randomly, or do you think they come back because they have something left to do?
Well, that's an interesting picture. Some people just have, relatively quick experiences, come right back. They just crash right back into their bodies. Others reach a barrier and they're told, you have to go back. And some actually make the choice. Some actually choose to come back. And I saw a number of cases of mothers, who went into trauma in childbirth. And they have a heavenly experience, and they come, but then they're told, your children need you, or they decide themselves, your children need you, and they'll come back on that basis. So, and people have a strong sense of something they have to do, but even those who come back will we'll come back, we'll have a sense of yearning, we'll maintain a sense of yearning, of wanting to return to that place, tend to see that place as their home, their true home. So.
I have an online question. Someone is asking, with regards to Bev Brodsky, did her religious life change at all?
Mine.
No, Bev's. Like,
Oh, Bev's.
Yeah.
Yeah, she became like, I don't know in detail, but she followed, the pattern of people will, whatever their religious background before, and many are, many come in, they're atheists to start or agnostics, and others are, committed to a particular religion, but they tend to reject the formal, the rules-based aspects of religion. And they'll join a church for the comfort of a faith community, but they become quite impatient with a lot of traditional religious ideas and the idea of God of judgment and punishment and so on.
Anyone else?
Alvin Suderman. I'm just wondering what the time lapse is, if there's an average from when they die until they come back. How does that range?
It varies quite a bit. It's typically like a few minutes. People aren't generally able to come back. Yeah. Oh, lost my thought there. So what was the question again? Sorry.
I was just wondering what the time lapse was between death and them coming back again to life.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay.
Is it pretty standard what the time lapse is, or does it vary?
It's generally like 3 to 5 minutes. People don't come back after much more than that usually. Then they just die. So it's not very long. But there's some remarkable stories of people who've been dead for half an hour. There was a story of Mary Neal, who was in a kayak, and she got trapped underwater under a waterfall, and she was drowned. She was drowned for 30 minutes, and she came back and was brought back to life. It's a remarkable story, talking about returns. Another famous case is Dr. Ibn Alexander, who had flesh-eating disease, and to save him, they put him in a deep coma, the deepest coma they could, for 7 days until they figured out a way to bring him back out of that, to solve that problem. And he had an extensive experience. He had all kinds of things. So that's kind of the range.
Is there any people who have had the experience who have had ALS? ALS.
Not that I'm aware of. Not saying they don't, but I just haven't
Okay, thanks.
come across any.
Anyone else? Any final words, Paul?
Well, just thank you for being here. Thanks for your questions. I really enjoyed this. This is sort of a requiem or whatever for me. I officially retired from CMU 9 years ago. and without any intentions of writing more books or doing anything else. And then this sort of this kind of a gift, really. It just kind of emerged out of my imagination. So,
Thank you, Paul. Well, I find that a very fascinating conversation and fascinating topic. And thank you. And thank you for sharing some of these stories. As I said earlier, this conversation has been recorded, will live on at commonword.ca, so others can view it, or you can revisit it if you'd like. Please stay for a bite to eat and to purchase a copy and to have a conversation further with Paul, and he's willing to sign your book at the table. But before we close, just a short conclusion. What happens when we die? Perhaps life's biggest question. It's certainly perplexing, perhaps even haunting. Truth and love suggests that near-death experiences, as Paul has said, point us to a compassionate and inclusive understanding of faith and spirituality, and that ultimately we are all connected, that we are all known, and that we're all loved. Whether that conclusion piques your curiosity, or you are grieving a loss, or searching for deeper understanding, may we each find assurance and comfort in others' experiences of God, who meets us in love on the eve of death. Peace to all of you, and may you have a good evening. Thank you for coming.